Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. We are learning Maseches Beitzah Daf Lamed Vav. We're going to be starting at the very top of that page, but as a little bit of background, yesterday we had asked a question as our new parak began about how much is appropriate to carry through the skylight from the roof. What is considered the normal amount to lower down? And we brought a Mishnah from Maseches Shabbos. So Ma'inyan Shmita Eitzel Har Sinai. You can't compare Shabbos and Yom Tov, and if you are going to, you have to be very nuanced about it. It's not just a simple thing to compare Shabbos and Yom Tov. As we'll see today, we know the famous line that Ein bein Shabbos leYom Tov ela meleches ochel nefesh bilvad, but that doesn't mean that every last blessed din is exactly the same. So the Gemara starts at the top with a couple of distinctions. We're going to learn 3 questions, all of which will end in a teku. But let's get started at the top. Hasam over there in Maseches Shabbos, Tanan, we had a Mishnah. Avaloas haotzer, that when one is cleaning out an otzer, they can't clean it out entirely. And how do we know that that's what the words avaloas haotzer mean? Because that's what Shmuel told us. Let's see. Amar Shmuel, my avaloas haotzer, avalo lo yigmores haotzer kulo. What we're concerned about is that one may end up removing all of the bales of hay. And if you did that, then the floor is going to be totally empty. And if you have some, compulsive tendencies, you're going to see a little bump on the ground. You're going to stomp on it with your feet or smooth it out with your feet or with your hands. And that's an Isser D'Oraisa called mashve gumos, la'ashvuye gumos, to smooth out the bumps. And that would be halachically problematic. So Shmuel was concerned that by Hilchos Shabbos, that we're not allowed to empty out the whole room out of concern about mashve gumos. Well, do we bring this concern of Hilchos Shabbos over the bridge to the world of Hilchos Yom Tov? Hachamai. What would we say by Yom Tov? Do we say Hasam hu b'Shabbos to Aser mishum dechamir? Would we say by Shabbos? There we're discussing something that's so strict. Aval Yom Tov the kil shaper dami. Maybe we should say that by Yom Tov the halachos should be a little bit different. Odilma Hasam dika bittul beis hamedrash. By Shabbos we have a concern of bittul beis hamedrash, but Hacha and Yom Tov we don't. To leka bittul beis hamedrash lo kol shekain. So we don't know if this can be expanded from one world to the other. In other words, let's ask the question again, and then we'll move on to the next question because we're not getting an answer yet. We're not getting an answer at all. The Gemara is going to answer teku. So the first question is that when we have a halacha by Shabbos, that you're allowed to move things, but not to the point that the whole room is empty because we're concerned about mashve gumos, do we bring that concern over to the world of Yom Tov when you're moving things on Yom Tov? We don't know. 8 lines down, Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. Hachatnan. We have in our Mishnah, Meshil Peres Derech Haruba B'Yom Tov. That's our Mishnah right on the previous Amud at the beginning of the parak, that we're allowed to lower fruits through the skylight on Yom Tov. V'amar Rav Nachman, Rav Loshanu El Ba'oso Hagag. Rav Nachman says that you can only bring fruit through the skylight that's actually on your roof, on the roof that has the skylight. Aval migag legag, from the neighbor's roof into your skylight, lo, that's not allowed. But Tanya Nami Hachi, first long line, and we have a lot of long lines on this page, but you'll see it moves pretty quickly. The Tanya Nami Hachi, the Beitzah supports this idea about limiting lowering stuff through a skylight from a roof that is not on the skylight roof. What does the Beitzah say? In metaltal and migag legag, you're not allowed to bring fruits from one roof to another. Afiluk shegagosein shavin. If you've ever been on top of the shuk in the old city, you'll know that the roofs you can literally just walk. Okay, sometimes there's some like minor thresholds, but it's really easy. We don't care. You're not allowed to bring fruits from your neighbor's roof into your skylight. That's not allowed. Afiluk shegagosein shavin. So it says the Gemara, the same question. We have that din by the laws of Yom Tov. Hasamai, over there by Shabbos, what would the halacha be? Do we say that hacha, skipping the parentheses, hacha over here, who the asar on Yom Tov, it's prohibited to go from roof to roof, mishum Yom Tov de kil v'asil zilzulei be, because on Yom Tov we're concerned that maybe one will be mezalzel in Yom Tov, they'll desecrate the Yom Tov. Okay, no big deal. Well, Yom Tov is more of a concern for being mezalzel because there are fewer restrictions on Yom Tov. Don't get me wrong. There's still a lot of malachos on Yom Tov, but we are concerned about zilzal yantiv. The Gemara has probably used this line about 30 times since the beginning of Shas. We're very concerned about zilzal yantiv. Aval, but maybe we would have said by Shabbos to Chamira, by Shabbos, which is very strict. Maybe we would have said velo asil zilzule b'shapir dami. We could have been more lenient by Shabbos. Oh, Dilma, no. Maybe mahacha, just like by Yom Tov, that by Yom Tov the ikahav said peros amrislo, where by Yom Tov the case that we're discussing is about losing fruit, but hasam, in the case of Shabbos, we're not talking about losing fruit. The leka have said peros lo kol shekain. All the more so we should be restricted. We don't have an answer to that either. So that question was, again, just to summarize question 2, is do we say that the restriction of moving things from roof to roof applies only on Yom Tov by fruit? Or can we bring it over the bridge to the world of Shabbos, that when you're moving things on Shabbos, you also cannot move it from roof to roof? Question 3, we're about a quarter of the way down 5 lines into the wide line, says the Gemara. Hacha, over here by the laws of Yom Tov, we've learned Tnan, we have in our Mishnah, Lo Yishal Shalem Bechevel Bechalonos, that one is not allowed to lower them down with a rope through a window. Below Yoridem derech sulamos, and one also cannot go down a ladder, not allowed. So that law we know applies by the laws of Yom Tov. Just to make a slight correction, is that it's when it says hacha tnan, it should be hacha tanya. Hacha by the world of Yom Tov, we have a Beitzah. So then now let's ask our question. We said on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to lower things down with a rope, and you're not allowed to use a ladder. Hasam, in regards to Hilchos Shabbos, my Hacha, do we say over here by Yom Tov, Hacha by Yom Tov would asr deleka bittul beis hamedrash, because there's no bittul Torah involved. We know that Yom Tov is chatzi lachem and chatzi lashem. So people are spending a lot more time at home. On Shabbos, there's no real din of chatzi lashem. You're supposed to be in the beis medrash on Shabbos. That was the standard. So do we say that by Yom Tov there's no bittul beis hamedrash? About Shabbos, tika bittul beis hamedrash shaper dami. Maybe we could be lenient to lower things down using a ladder. Odilma, or perhaps we should say we're 1/3 of the way down, almost at the 2 dots there. Or do we say, Odilma, hacha by Yom Tov dika hefsid peros amrislo? We're dealing with fruits that could spoil if it rains. But hasam, in the case of Shabbos, where we have to move bales of hay deleka hefsid peros lo kol sheken, that it should not be allowed. Teku, we don't know the answers to any of these questions. So we've given three cases, but let me just give the yesod. And the yesod is like this. When there is a rabbinic injunction that applies by Yom Tov, do we expand it to Shabbos? When there is a rabbinic injunction that applies by Shabbos, do we extend it over to Yom Tov? The short answer is that every case needs to be analyzed, and many of the cases will be left in a teku. We just don't know this level of nuance. Shabbos and Yom Tov are so similar. It makes it so hard to discern the nuances from one case to another, and therefore one should not make those assumptions on their own lekula, nor should they make them lechumra. If you have a shaila, you should ask a competent posek. But in general, we have a lack of clarity when it comes to extending either a din by Yom Tov to Shabbos or a din from Shabbos to Yom Tov. 1/3 of the way down at the 2 dots, we had said in our Mishnah, Mechasen es haperos, that one is allowed to cover peiros in order to prevent them from getting wet, because they're drying up on your roof. This is our Mishnah right here at the beginning of the parak. It's the end of the first line of our Mishnah on Lamed Hey Amud Beis, where it says that one is allowed to cover fruits with a kli if water is dripping. So let's analyze this. The Gemara says, you're even allowed to cover, forget fruit, you're even allowed to cover bricks. Now, the bricks that we have, the way that our bricks are made is that they're probably oven dried, I presume, and they're ready to be exposed to the elements. Their bricks were air drying and they were not ready to be exposed to the elements. And the introduction of water to these bricks would potentially have ruined them. So the Gemara says in the name of Ula, and we're going to be analyzing this shita and his counterpart over the course of the next many lines. Ula says, "Ve'afilu avira delivni." Not only can you cover fruit, you can even cover bricks that have yet to fully dry. Rabbi Yitzchak amar peiros haru'uyin, only fruits, because those are edible. Those are actually usable, but bricks are not. Rabbi Yitzchak, who does not allow the covering of bricks and who only allows the covering of peiros, he follows his own shita. Okay, this is a very important idea. It sounds simple, but let's just make sure we understand it. Ein kli nital. If you have one kli that you're picking up to use for another scenario, you can only pick up that kli for another scenario if that other scenario is also mutter. So therefore, he holds that because fruits are edible and they may get ruined, you can pick up a kli and cover them. But the bricks, not usable. You can't build. They're muksa. So therefore, you can't pick up product A to cover product B because product B is not eligible to be used. And that's why he argues against Ula. But the Gemara says, we have a source that seems to lean in one direction. Tanan, the Mishnah writes, look at the language. Mechasenes ha peiros bekelim. What does our Mishnah say? That you're allowed to cover fruits. What does it not say? You're allowed to cover bricks. Peiros in, avir delivni lo. So this is a kasha on the shita of ula. How can you say that you're allowed to cover the bricks? Our Mishnah specifically said peiros, and even the most simple learner could look at the word peiros and say, why did you say bricks if it says peiros? And the Gemara says that's not a good argument. Hu adin, really halachically speaking, it's also logical to assume de'afilu avir delivni, that one is even allowed to cover bricks that would be damaged by the rain. The idea to turn a resha mashilin peiros, because the resha of our Mishnah was specifically talking about fruits, even though it's not specifically applicable to the seifa, but still, Tana seifa nami mechasen esaper, same language. But halachically speaking, whereas in the resha it's only true by peiros that you're allowed to lower them because of rain through the skylight, it is only true that in the seifa, it is also true that you can also cover bricks. We don't want them to get ruined. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Tnan, v'chein kade yain, v'chein kade shemen. I don't understand. All of a sudden, we started detailing things in our Mishnah. If you want to tell me that peiros was stam, that it really wasn't specific to peiros, like we just answered, and really the only reason we used peiros in the seifa was because of the resha, but really anything can be covered. So why then did the Mishnah go back in detail that wine and oil were allowed to be covered? If bricks are allowed to be covered, certainly wine and oil. Says the Gemara, that's not true. What was the Mishnah dealing with when it was discussing the cases of kadeh yain and kadeh shemen? Betivla. That's usher to eat. And that was a chiddush. So the Mishnah said, that case we had to detail. Why? Because had we not detailed the case of the oil and wine when it was tevel, that we would not have known was included as an item that can be covered. And therefore, so far, everything seems to be able to be covered. And hachanami mistabra, it's reasonable to assume that when our Mishnah stipulates that wine and oil can be covered, that it is tevel. Had it been that our Mishnah had intended that kadeh yain, that when it refers to the pitchers of wine and the pitchers of oil, that they were mutter and that they were not tevel, that would have already been, of course, that's mutter to cover. Why wouldn't it be mutter to cover? There's no reason to include the line of, hey, don't forget that you also can cover the pitchers of oil and the pitchers. Of course you can cover them. There must be a reason why the Mishnah included that case. Pshita, obviously it should be included. And the answer is the reason why we're allowed to include them is because they were made out of tevel. Says the Gemara, well, really, the truth is that kadeh yain v'kadeh shemen itzrichale, even without your explanation of tevel, I could come up with another reason why the wine and the oil in our Mishnah needed to be explicated. And that is sal kadaita chamina. I might have thought that only lehefsid meruba chashashu, that only if you were going to lose a barrel of wine or a barrel of oil, then it would have been problematic. Lehefsid muat, but these kadeh yain, these small pitchers of wine and the small pitchers of oil, maybe we would have said lo chashashu, kamash malan, that we are choshesh. It's not only behefsid meruba, it's not only with a significant loss do we allow one to cover an item that may get damaged because of rain, even a relatively insignificant, like let's say you have, the wine I use for brises. I go to Jewel. I don't let anybody buy wine for me. I want the right alcohol percentage, and certainly by the fry who don't know hechsher at all, I buy all the wine. So I go to Jewel, to the bottom rack, and I buy the Kedem wine for $4.59 each per bottle. You buy 6, you get a discount. Fantastic deal. So they're very cheap. Is it a hefsid meruba for me to lose one of those bottles? No, I leave them at people's houses all the time. I forget. I don't care. It's nothing. Halachically speaking, I can still cover that. It's only a hefsid mulan. Kamash mulan. That's what the Gemara is coming to teach us. Oh, so that's all of that was the first part of this sugya. The Gemara continues almost 2/3 of the way down, halfway through the thick lines. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Nosnin kli tachas hadlaf b'Shabbos, that you're allowed to put a kli underneath dripping water, and usually this water is disgusting. The water that drips through your house is maybe pure rainwater is not so bad, depends where you live. But rainwater that's like dripping off your house, I would not drink that. That's disgusting. Have you ever looked in your gutters? Because I've cleaned out my gutters before. They're disgusting, and I would certainly not drink that water. So what do we see from here? We see that you're allowed to cover something that's muktzah, because that water that's dripping down is gross. Says the Gemara, that would then imply that the shita of Ula is correct, that you're allowed to cover the bricks, because we see here that you're allowed to cover the dirty water, and both of them are muktzah for Shabbos. Says the Gemara, not a raya for Ula, b'dulaf haraui. No, this dripping of water is clean. It's coming off of a part of the roof that you just cleaned, or whatever the case may be. It's through a system that you've created that the water is clean. All right, let's try again. Tashma, porson machzeles al gabe levenim b'Shabbos. We see that one is allowed to take a, like a tarp, and you're allowed to put it on top of bricks on Shabbos. And that should be muksa. Bricks are muksa. So we see again a raya for ula. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Da'aisor mi binyana. They're extra bricks that are loose. They're not part of a building. And the chazi lemizga alayhu, and they are chazi lemizga. You can sit on them, you can lean on them. They have a use, so they're not muksa. So again, we tried to prove for ula, we failed. Let's try again to prove for ula. Says the Gemara, Tashma, porson machatzeles al gabe avonim b'Shabbos. We see that you're allowed to cover with a tarp, with a blanket of some kind. You're allowed to cover rocks on Shabbos. Everybody knows that rocks on Shabbos are muksa. Yeah, we didn't live in their culture. They used rocks for cleaning themselves after going to the bathroom. Ba'avonim mikurzalos. Mikurzalos are, they're shaped in a very specific way. They kind of have not so much sharp edges, but well-defined edges to help clean oneself. The chazi and the Beitzah, those were used for the bathroom. So again, we try to prove ula, that just like ula wanted to say that these bricks which were useless were allowed to be covered. We see over here, these bricks which are useless can be covered, the stones. We say, no, they're chaz in the Beitzah Kisei. All right, what about the next case? Tashma. We see another case where maybe ula is correct, that you can even cover something that's muksa. Porson machzelas al gabe kaveres devorim b'Shabbos. One is allowed to take a tarp and cover over a beehive on Shabbos. And not only can you do that, you can do it under all circumstances. As long as you don't have kavana to trap. This is a bit of a strange line. Okay, as long as you don't have kavana, but what if you trap? Right. So if it's a definite trapping, so what does this line mean? This is a little hard to understand. And we're going to get into this in the Gemara. So it says the Gemara, but before we get to the difficult part, I should say not difficult, it's not so hard. But before we try to explain the line about Sud, says the Gemara, Hasam nami de'ikadvash. No, you're covering that, but it's not muksa because you saved some honeycombs that you were ready to eat even on the holiday, even on Shabbos. So no problem. Omar le Rav Ukva mimishan le Rav Ashi. Rav Ukva mimishan says your story makes a lot of sense about the bees, that you're allowed to cover that you can cover the beehive, but bees don't last all year. Depends where you live. In Chicago, they're going to soon die out. They're great around Sukkot, and then they don't last much longer. When it gets cold, they're all done for. Says the Gemara, I could understand why you say that the beehive is not muksa, because you've saved some of the honeycombs for yourself, because there's edible honey. But bimosag shamim, in the winter months when it's rain season, ma'ika lememar, there are no bees. So how can you say that it's not muksa? This should be a beautiful raya for ula, because bimosag shamim, the Mishnah says you're still allowed to cover the beehive. But why would you be allowed to do that if there's no honey in the beehive? It should be muksa, in which case ula seems to be right that you can even cover those bricks. Says the Gemara, nah, don't worry about it. Really, don't worry. The way that bees apparently, I guess, I don't know if this is correct in modern science, I don't know, but the Gemara says that what would happen is that when bees try to stay alive over the course of the winter, is that they save shtei chalos. They save 2 cuts of a beehive of the honey to support themselves, to sustain themselves over the course of the winter. So if that's the case, then you can eat those. Says the Gemara, but those are not yours. Those are meant to keep the bees alive. They're not for you to take. Osan shtei chalos muktzos hein. That's not a raya. So says the Gemara, well, I don't have an obligation to keep bees alive. Halachically speaking, there's no isser of tsar ba'alei chaim when it comes to bugs. So it's not nice to step on bugs, but if they're in your house, zay no problem at all. Tsar ba'alei chaim doesn't apply. It applies, but there's nothing wrong with trapping mice in your house either. That's not a problem with tsar ba'alei chaim. But in general, there's no isser of tsar ba'alei chaim by bugs. So I'm taking their food and they're going to die. No, that's not their bugs. That's okay. So it says the Gemara, I had in mind to eat their 2 chalas. I'll starve them. They'll die out, and nothing wrong with that. So then says the Gemara, we have a problem with this. Let's say your answer is good. All right, you had in mind, you got out of it, very good. It's not muksa. What would have happened if you didn't have kavanah to take these 2 chalos, these 2 pieces of honeycomb? So says the Gemara, the halacha would have been that it's asr, that a taka would have been muksa. So if it's muksa, so why are we talking about a case that speaks about sud? If you're saying that what we're talking about is muksa, so why did you say in the Beitzah that as long as we make sure that we're not going to do tzad? That's not what you should have said. Liflog v'lisnei b'dida. This is a semi-common phrase in Shas, and it means that you should have factored in your concerns explicitly into the Beitzah. How so? When do we say that it is not muksa to cover a beehive? When you had in mind to eat the 2 chalos, the 2 pieces of honeycomb that the bees were planning on eating for the winter, for hibernation. Period. What is the whole thing about tzad? Why are we talking about tzad when it comes to the bees? So it says the Gemara as follows, 6 lines from the bottom. Hachi kamar. This is pshat. Even if you had in mind, you still have to make sure. You still have to have in mind not to do kavan. So it says the Gemara, stop everything in its tracks. There's a problem in this Mishnah, this Beitzah. This Beitzah says that you're allowed to cover a beehive as long as you don't plan on trapping. So it says the Gemara, b'mayu kimta. How do we understand this Beitzah? Rabbi Yehuda de Islay Muksa. It seems to be that we are concerned about Muksa, like Rabbi Yehuda, because what does Rabbi Yehuda hold? He says that we're concerned about Muksa, and what do we have over here? That if you're not chishev alein, if you didn't plan to take them, that it's going to be yasser. That implies that there's halachos of muksa. But ema seifa at the end of the Mishnah, what does it say? Ubilvad shelo yiskaven latzud. There at the end of the Mishnah, when it says ubilvad shelo yiskaven latzud, it's not talking about muksa. There, the Mishnah is showing its cards, and it's saying our concern is not muksa, it's tzad, it's trapping. That's a son of Reb Shimon. That sounds like the sheet of Reb Shimon, de Amar, davar shein miskaven mutter. So we have a machlokes here as to what our Mishnah is like. We don't know if it's like Reb Yehuda in regards to muksa, and we don't know if it's like Reb Shimon in regards to davar shein miskaven. And certainly not consistent with people, that's for sure. The Reisha is Reb Yehuda in regards to one sugya, and Reb Shimon in regards to another. Let's all get on the same page. Says the Gemara, this is really not a concern, but Tizbara de Reb Shimon. How can you say that Reb Shimon would ever say the line, that you're not allowed to trap? Abaye v'Rava to Amri Tarvaihu, they both say about Reb Shimon as follows. Moda Reb Shimon b'psik reisha v'lo yamas. Reb Shimon says that even though we have a principle of davar shein miskaven mutter, that when I don't intend on the malacha being a result, but if that result is guaranteed, that's not davar shein miskaven. That's called a psik reisha. And when there's a psik reisha, he's not lenient. So the example that I've given before is you're sitting in a chair opposite a wall and you're bouncing a ball off the wall. There's also a light switch on the wall, like one of these light switches that are very flat, the ones that just kind of very quickly, you touch the top and you touch, not the flip switch, those are a little harder. But if you have one of these switches, you're throwing a ball against the wall. So if there's a very small percentage chance you're going to hit the light switch, then it's mutter to bounce the ball off the wall. And even if inadvertently you turned off the light, no, okay, but that's not usher. Davar shein miskaven is mutter. But if the only spot on the wall is the light switch and you know you're going to turn it off, Reb Shimon wouldn't say that's davar shein miskaven is mutter. So when the Mishnah says, ubilvad shelo yiskaven latzud, you're going to trap all the bees, but it shouldn't be your kavanah. That can't be Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon doesn't say davar shein miskaven in a case like that. Reb Shimon says in a case like that it's usher because it's a psik reisha. The results are definite. And the leniency of davar shein miskaven doesn't apply when the results are definite. So therefore the Gemara says you're right. This Beitzah is not talking about Reb Shimon at all. Le'olam kula Rabbi Yehuda. Really, the Mishnah, the Beitzah, about the bees is all talking about Rabbi Yehuda. V'hacha b'maya skinan. What are we dealing with? What's our case? Te'is bakvi. There are windows. So basically, you have a place where all the bees are, and you throw a tarp over it. However, the bees can still get in and out. You haven't properly trapped them. We discussed this in the previous one of the previous prakim of Ein Sudden. I think that was the third parak. Ein Sudden Dagim Abibar. We spoke about that there. If there's a way for them to escape, then you haven't really trapped them. If there's a window and you didn't cover the window, so then you're good to go. The Lotema the Rabbi Yehuda, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Beitzah would not read quote Ubilvad shelo yiskaven latzud. The language is a little off. We turn to the top of Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Ela Ema, what should the Beitzah have said? It should have said Ubilvad shelo ya'asena mitzuda. You shouldn't make it a netting whereby the animals can't get out at all. But the Gemara doesn't like this explanation of Rabbi Yehuda because that is extremely obvious. Pshita. Obviously, as long as you don't cover everything, it's going to be mutter. And if you do cover everything, the ceiling and all, it's, you have an occlusive dressing. You're done. It's airtight. Of course, that's a problem. So what's Rabbi Yehuda talking about? Says the Gemara, Mahu detema. This gets to the core of the halachos of tzad. Mahu detema. You might have said b'mino nitzod aser. The only types of animals that are usher to trap are animals that we typically trap. fish, game, a kosher game, whatever they are. Yeah, all true. Bees? We don't trap bees to keep them. We might trap bees to kill them or to get them off of the honey jar, but we don't want to have any interest in the bees. So therefore, maybe we would have said the only time that tzad is aser is b'mino nitzod. However, shelo b'mino nitzod muter, kamash malan, that we are concerned about tzad no matter what. And that's what this is coming to teach us. And sikum hadvarim, the summary is that the brisa which speaks about the bees is all Rav Yehuda. And what we're talking about is a case where, yes, he covers the top of the place where all the bees are so that they don't get ruined, that the honeycombs don't get ruined. But there's no issue of tzad because he didn't cover it entirely with the net. And that brings us to the answer of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi has a different answer than all of this. We remember we asked a question, hey, what about the winter? And we said, don't worry, there was two honeycombs inside. Rav Ashi has a totally different approach on this front. Rav Ashi Amar, Miktani bimos hachama uvimos hagshamim. The language doesn't say in the summer and in the winter. The language was bechama, in the sun, mipnei hachama, because it's hot. Uvikshamim, and when it rains, mipnei hagshamim ktani, a little bit of a different language. And what can we see from there? We're not talking about seasonal winter or seasonal summer. What we're talking about is very simple. B'yomei Nisan of Yomei Tishrei. The month of Nisan, Pesach time, some days are cold, some days are hot. And in Tishrei, some days are cold and some days are hot. We had a great Tishrei, but it was a month earlier than usual. Wait till next year and we'll look back at this Gemara and say, okay, this Gemara has a little bit more teeth. But the Gemara's point is the Ika Chama v'Ika Gshamim. We have both, v'Ika Dvash. And therefore, that's what we're talking about. So the whole lengthy complexity that we just went through for the first approach of, wait a minute, hold on. How could you say b'mosag shamim? If you say b'mosag shamim, that implies that there's no honey. No, there was honey. It was the two honeycombs we were saving to keep the bees alive. None of that. We don't need any of that. The Mishnah wasn't saying summer and winter. The Mishnah was saying on the days that feel like summer and the days that feel like winter. But in the common denominator to both is that there was actually still honey, and the question falls away. That brings us to the two dots, 7 lines down, Lamed Vav, Amud Beis, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihya b'varo. So we said in our Mishnah at the opening of the parak, v'nosten kli tachas hadlaf b'Shabbos, that we're allowed to catch the drip by putting a bowl, by putting a pot of some kind under the drip. Tana, im nismali, the Beitzah writes, im nismali hakli, if the kli fills up, shofech, you can pour it out, v'shona, and repeat, ve'eno nimna, no problem, as many times as you need. There's no problems of muksa at all. You have to make sure not to dump it directly on grass, though. That, of course, would be a problem of mashke, of choresh. The poskim discuss what is the isser of watering grass on Shabbos. What is that? Think about what we have. We have choresh, and we have zoreya, and we have kotzer. What is it? So some say that there's a tolda of choresh called mashke. That's an interesting approach. I don't remember seeing that in the Gemara, but I think the Eglei Tal has a whole diun on this. The Eglei Tal, Lamates, the Eglei Tal wrote a commentary on the Lamates Malachos, critical book when one is learning Hilchos Shabbos Halacha L'Maisa. But nevertheless, let's come back to our sugya. One is in fact allowed to let the bowl fill up, and then you can dump it out and start all over again. Beirei Chaya, the Gemara tells a story. Beirei Chaya de Abaye Daluf. The Beirei Chaya was the crushing room. He had a mill, kind of like in his garage, and it was leaking. Now, the way that these grinding machines were held to the ground was with dried cement. And the enemy of dried mud, the enemy of dried mud is water. So it started dripping inside that room. Asa the Kame de Rabbi ran to Shul. Rebbe, help me. What am I supposed to do? So Amar le Zil, Ayle lepur yachlahasam. Go, and what you should do is take your bed and move your bed into that room. Why? Because if your bed is in that room, so then then the water that's dripping in, which is disgusting, has the status of a graf shel rei, which is the equivalent of today's dirty diaper. And if that's true, ve'apke, then you can take out the water, no problem. So when there's no bed in there, the graf shel, who cares? You're not living in that room. But by moving your bed in, clever solution, by moving your bed in, so now the water becomes a graf shel rei, becomes disgusting, and therefore you can start collecting the water, no problem at all. Just remove it. The Talmud didn't like the answer. Yossi Abaye sat down. He's like, listen, Rebbe, v'kakashele, I don't understand something. What's the problem? V'chi osin graf shel rei l'chatchila. Can I induce a scenario where I force the hand of halacha to say, oh, now it's a graf shel rei? Ke'ilu, if you could imagine that there's a dog, and the dog goes to the bathroom on your lawn, and you want to take it off your lawn. So you pick up your whole Shabbos table and you move it onto the lawn. You forced that scenario. That's not a natural scenario of graf shel rei. Leave it alone. It's on your front lawn. You're fine. Don't play on your front lawn, but it's a graf shel rei. You're not allowed to create that case l'chatchila. Adahachi, in the meantime, nafal be'rechaya de'abaye. While he's sitting there fighting with Rabba about his psak to bring the bed in, and therefore you can remove the water, all the water soaked in, and it weakened the mud connections, and his whole thing fell down. Omar Abaye slapped himself on the wrist. Teisi li, I deserved that. Ze'avre adamar, because I went against the word of my master. Conclusion, seemingly, of the Gemara is that one is in fact allowed to make a graf shel rei l'chatchila. That's okay. You're allowed to come up with a scenario like that, though if I had to make an implication from the Gemara, it would only be where there's a tzorech. It would only be where there's a risk. So let's say you had a leak in your garage, and you don't normally eat in your garage, but you have a lot of sensitive equipment. My father builds challah boards. The wood is very, very sensitive to water for long exposures of time. So, okay, guess what, guys? We're eating lunch in the sukkah. We're eating lunch in the garage today, so that I can force the case of graf shel rei. That would be mutter. It says the Gemara Diuk Amar Shmuel. We're a third of the way down on Lamed Vav Lamed Beis. We're going to go to the very top line of Lamed Zayin and Aleph, and then we'll stop. Amar Shmuel graf shel rei ve'avid shel meme raglaim mutter lehotzian la'ashba. If you have a graf shel rei, again the equivalent of a dirty diaper, or you have a container of urine, the halacha is mutter lehotzian la'ashba. Those can be taken out of one's house to be brought to the garbage. Baruch Hashem. Ukshehu machziro. However, when you're bringing the container back in, the container that was holding the urine or the fecal matter, whatever it is, no sein bo mayim umachziro. You should first fill it up with water before you carry it back, because the kli is disgusting. What is its purpose? At least bring back some water for the animals to drink. Savur mina. What's implied from here is that graf shel rei agav mana in, that a graf shel rei can only be carried agav mana, can only be carried inside of a kli in, but bifnei atzmo on its own low. So what would that mean halacha l'maisa? That if I have a dirty diaper, I first have to put it in something else to bring it to the alley, put it in the target bag first, and then carry the target bag. That's what's implied, because it seemed to be that the way that one was removing the urine and the excrement was in a kli. So it says the Gemara, that's not a good diuk. Tashma, I can bring you a raya that we have a case of graf shel rei where we don't use a kli. De'ahu achbarta, there was a mouse, the ishtakach be isparmaki de Ravashi, that was found in the spice bin of Ravashi. Amar lehu Ravashi. Ravashi said, "Naktuha bitzutzisa." I think we saw this Gemara before. I remember learning it somewhere. It's Maseches Shabbos. Pick it up by its tail. Ve'afkuha. Are you using a kli? No, you're picking up the mouse itself. When I was in biolab and we used to do procedures on mice, that was what they told us to do. Always pick them up by their tail. It's a graf shel rei. But anyways, that wasn't graf shel rei material. Anyways, we're halfway down. Let's start with the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah writes, this is the Gemara is going to make the Mishnah very clear, but the Mishnah is a little difficult to understand. For me, it was at least. Kol shechayav and alav mishum shvus. Under any circumstance in which on Yom Tov, in which on Shabbos there's going to be a restriction, or mishum rishus, in an area where there's something that you're allowed to do but not required to do, or mishum mitzvah, or you have a mitzvah to do it, but the Chachamim restrict you b'Shabbos, chayav and alav b'Yom Tov. Ve'elu hein mishum shvus. What are the things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos that you're also then not allowed to do on Yom Tov? So says the Gemara, lo olin be'ilan. You're not allowed to climb a tree. Applies both on Shabbos and both on Yom Tov. Below rochven al gabe behemoth. You cannot ride an animal. Applies both on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Below shatin al panei hamayim. You're not allowed to float in the water. Oh man, where's Mark? I hope you're watching this. Below shatan al panei hamayim. One is not allowed to float on the water. That applies both on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Ve'ein metapchen, a person cannot clap. Ve'ein misapken, a person can't make a sound by hitting his body. Below merakten, and a person can't dance. Remember, we saw the Tosfos there earlier in the Masechta, that where Tosfos kind of said, oh, that doesn't apply nowadays because they were Bekim and we're not Bekim. Anyways, the Mishnah concludes, The Mishnah continues. What was an example in the Mishnah of something which isn't usher, but also isn't a mitzvah, that is usher on Shabbos and on Yom Tov? That's lo done, and you can't sit in Bezdin. Below makachin, you cannot get married. Below cholzin, you can't do chalitza. Below miyapmin, you also can't do yibum. It's very strange because some of these are mitzvahs. That's going to be one of the questions of the Gemara. Meanwhile, mitzvah. What are the examples of mitzvahs that we don't allow on Shabbos that we do and we equally don't allow on Yom Tov? Says the Gemara, lo makdishin, lo ma'arichin, lo macharimin. A person has a mitzvah to give things to the Beis Hamikdash. So makdishin, ma'arichin, and macharimin are different ways to make these dedications. It's a mitzvah to do so, but you cannot do so on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Below magbihin, truma, u'maiser as well. There's a mitzvah to give truma and maiser. We've spent a lot of time talking about that of late, and that is also not allowed to be done. Kol elu b'Yom Tov, amru kal v'chomer b'Shabbos. So a lot of these were said by the laws of Yom Tov, and they apply on Shabbos as well. It's interesting because if you look at the Resha of the Mishnah, it says that if it happens on Shabbos, then you're chayav alav b'Yom Tov. And the Seifa says that kol elu b'Yom Tov amr. So that's a little difficulty. Hopefully we'll get to that a little bit later. Not today, but in the future. Kal v'chomer b'Shabbos. Last line of the Mishnah, one of the most famous lines of this Masechta that is quoted all the time. Ein bein Shabbos liyom, ein bein Yom Tov l'Shabbos, ela ochal nefesh bilvad. The only categorical distinction between the two holidays of Yom Tov and Shabbos is meleches ochal nefesh. These are the melachos that allow us to cook. Ach asher yachel ochal nefesh, based on the pasuk of ach, and that is what is considered to be allowed. The Gemara starts to detail some of the things that are listed here, the ones that are restricted both on Shabbos and Yom Tov, la'olin be'ilan. Why can't you climb a tree? Gzera shemi yitalosh. We're afraid that someone may tear off a branch. Why can a person not ride an animal on Shabbos? So the Gemara gives one answer that gets rejected. Gzera shemi yitzeh. You get on a horse, they could easily run chutz l'tchum. How far is that? It's 3,500 feet, a little bit. It's 3/5 of a mile, a little bit more than 3/5 of a mile. Not so far. So says the Gemara, that's not allowed. No, that's not correct. Shmami, no, you're trying to say that tchumen are doraisa. If ein rochman al gabe behim is a rabbinic injunction, and the concern is tchum, you're implying that tchum is a din doraisa, and that's not true. We don't paskin that way. We paskin that tchum is a din derabanan. So says the Gemara, therefore that's not the concern. What then is the concern of riding a behema on Shabbos and Yom Tov? Alexander mishum yachtoch zmora. We're afraid that a person is going to break off a branch. What in the world is he talking about? Why are we concerned about breaking off a branch when you're riding a horse? So if you've ever watched horse racing, you'll know the answer to that. And Rashi says the same thing, 6 lines from the bottom, although Rashi said it first. Shema yachtoch zmora lahakosa. We're afraid that you're going to tear off a branch in order to hit the animal to make it move. So really, inherently, there's nothing wrong with riding an animal on Shabbos. It's a secondary concern that we're afraid that one will do that. You're not allowed to be in the water on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. And we're afraid that you might make something that will actually float. Machlokas in the Rishonim as to what exactly we're talking about here, not for now. We said you can't clap, you can't make that sound by hitting on your body. You also can't dance. Says the Gemara, why? We're afraid that a person is going to be such an expert that they could correct their errors in such a way that it would be a tikkun. We said that one of the examples of a rishus is that one is not allowed to sit in a case of din. And the Gemara says here, mitzvah ka'avid. It's a mitzvah to sit. Tzedek tirdof. We have a mitzvah for bezdin. So what are you talking about? Why is that? Why are you putting this in the category of rishus? So the Gemara says you're right in general that's true, but in this case we have an ukimta. There's a bigger Talmud Chacham than you. So if there's a bigger Talmud Chacham, if someone asks you a shaila, so are you obligated to answer it? Is it a mitzvah for you to answer it in general? There's no mitzvah if there's a bigger Talmud Chacham than you. So that's why we have Batei Din with the biggest Talmidei Chachamim in the community. That's usually how it's built. At least we tried for that to happen. And when there's a bigger Talmid Chacham than you, then there is no mitzvah for you to answer the shaila, but it's a rishus. You could. So that's how this case of Danin is not a mitzvah deraisa. And then the next case is, where are we? The last line. Below Bakachin. One is not allowed to get married. So what are you talking about? You call that a rishus? Getting married is a mitzvah. This is a big machlokas rishonim. Is getting married a mitzvah? Yes or no? Is it a no? Is it a yes? Or is it just a heichi timtza to get to the mitzvah of pru or vu? So says the Gemara, lo tzricha de'is le'isha banim. It's after one already is married and has children. So what does the Gemara imply here about the din d'oraisa of getting married? That there's only a din d'oraisa to get married as it relates to having children, seemingly. Not so simple because it says Isha Uvanim, which is the extra word. If you what is that proof? It's not such a clear Gemara, but that's why there's a discussion in the Rishonim, not only here, throughout Shas, this conversation comes up as to what exactly is going on here with the mitzvah of getting married. But the Gemara does say that, yes, getting married is a mitzvah when one does not have an Isha Uvanim, but once he already has them, then it is not a mitzvah. We'll stop right here on the top line of Lamed Zayin. Mirza Hashem, tomorrow night we'll learn a blot and a half. Sunday night, we have a siyum. I have a list of about 11, 12 people who have signed up. If you've sent me anything, I have recorded it. If you would like to sign up, please do so as soon as you can, preferably before Shabbos, so that I can order the appropriate amount of food. We'll be ordering from Sandwich Club. On Monday, I most likely will be pre-recording and posting. If that changes, I will let you know. Wishing you all a beautiful night.